Okay, so thank you very much for this kind introduction and for the invitation to speak here. Of course, this is a great honor and a great pleasure, and I'm pretty nervous about it, right? And I thought, well, the World Day of Philosophy, right? I think this is really important, what you're doing here. And I don't want to bring ready-made concepts or truths which just have to be published, right? I thought I'd rather bring a question for all of us, right? I really think we have, of course, we have lots of important questions to solve. But I encountered in my thinking a question of which I think, oh, here it comes. Okay, you see you see in this image, I like it. It's the driver who is exhausted riding his truck. Yeah, I've encountered a problem of which I think it is very important, and I don't have a philosophical solution to it. I actually think that, particularly, you know, I'm used and trained in Western forms of philosophy and sociology, and at least I thought, well, it seems to me that we forgot about something, namely about what I want to call social energy. And I found that maybe there are other forms of philosophy beyond Europe, honestly, in India, in China, in Africa, and even, I will talk about it in a second, which had this kind of missing concept, or at least had parts of it. So I want to point out to you where I think the problem is and where we could start looking for a solution. And it's not just, I believe, a philosophical problem, at least not to me. I believe it's a problem for society. I want to this is what I do as a social philosopher and a sociologist, right? Trying to come up with the best possible account of the world we live in. But no one can do that by him or herself. We have to enter then into a dialogue and see where we are and where we need to go. And I thought, okay, it's the day of philosophy, right? So we could start with the metaphysics. I always felt threatened by metaphysics. It's it's so big, right? And it's these are the unsolvable questions, right? But you could say that the starting point of metaphysics and therefore of all philosophy could be the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is it that there is something, you could say, right? Why is there something? I don't know whether you ever had this experience. I must say that I sometimes had it even when I was young, that I was wondering, why is there something, right? Or why is there me, for example? And this is according to Leibniz or Heidegger, or then Nozick has written a book, I think it is exactly this title. Why is there something rather than nothing? But I think there is a second metaphysical question, which we very often forget, right? And I would say in the metaphysical discourse of modernity, it's been very often overlooked or forgotten. Why is there movement rather than inertia? Or why is there change rather than continuity? It's not everywhere change than continuity, but nevertheless, the world is kind of moving. It's in motion. And when you read Aristotle, of course, he discusses exactly these 2 points, right? Substance and change. And then he reflects on the prime mover. What is moving the thing? And I want to turn this question from metaphysics a bit more down to earth, right? To the world we share, what UNESCO and UNO are concerned about. What is the prime mover? What is moving social life and society? Why? Okay. So I mean, actually, when we looked, we can turn to physics, and then we see it's getting very interesting, because you could from physics, I believe, derive the philosophical idea that maybe it could in the end be the same question, right? For them, matter is not exactly energy, right? But mass and energy can be equated. They are somehow equivalent. You remember Einstein's formula, a famous formula, E equals m times c square c, right? So there is a connection between energy and mass. And physics tells you that if you have a kind of high energy vacuum, then what there is, the subatomic particles, just have a tendency to exist, right? So there you see that energy and matter, substance, maybe are in a duality which inflicts each other. But the thing is, but the question for me was do we have something like social energy, right? In social life, obviously we need energy to get things done, right? So you could say in physics, energy is a kind of a potential energy. Think of what is energy in coal, for example, or potential energy really, or nuclear energy or so. Energy is the potential to create either heat or movement, right? And therefore to get work done, you could say, right? To get some kind of work done. If you use that, then social energy could be the potential to get social work done, to get things done in our life or in our world. How did I arrive at this? I don't want to present you with my whole philosophy, but you already heard a bit of it, right? I started a few years. I think it's about. It's more than 25. Is it really 25 years? No, it's 15 years, right? I published this book on social acceleration, where my interpretation of modernity was that we have kind of created a world now on a global, really in a global context, which accelerates incessantly, right? We are speeding up the world. I sometimes make the story, if you were aliens watching us down on Earth, right? Then you could really see that about starting in the 18th century, and part of the history is very bleak because it has to do with colonialism and other things, right? But what you could observe is that the human species down there on Earth starts to set the world in motion, literally, with transport, with production, with the steamships, the railways, the cars, the planes, but even the e-bike and the scooter and the bike, we are kind of setting the world in motion. That's the physical side. But apart from that, we have also created a high-energy society, you could say, which is kind of changing, which is transformed all the time, right? So the question could be, where does this energy come from? Because I claimed in that book that this social acceleration is driven by physical energy, coal and carbon-based. It was fossil energy for most part of the world, and it still is. But also by kind of political energy, building infrastructures, coming up with educational programs, for example, right? Creating party system or democracies or political rules, right? Which kind of permanently try to activate people and activate infrastructures and so on. But it also needs psychic energy, our individual energy. I will come back to that in a second. And then I realized that there might be a problem with this. There's an energy problem, literally. We're heating up the atmosphere, but we are also burning out from the inside. That's why I speak to you today, right? My claim is we have a dual energy problem somehow, right? So there is a question and there is a problem. And in the acceleration book, I claimed that this form of being in the world and being to the world creates alienation. It doesn't seem to lead to the good life. I cannot go into the story now because I see the clock ticking right in front of me, right? I have to hurry up. So I asked myself, what is a non-alienated form of being in the world? You know, you just heard it from the president. We need to ask also about the good life. What is a good human life? And my answer to this was another big book. Life is good when we are in resonance with the world, in resonance with each other, in resonance with our working tools, in resonance with nature, even in resonance with our bodies and with ourselves. But I realized that there too, being in resonance is a kind of dynamic process. It's not just a state given, right? It's like if you create resonance in a room, right? Maybe with an event like this, I'm sure here you often feel resonance. It's like there is an energy in the room, right? And sometimes from moments like this, something new gets born. Some change might initiate what Hannah Arendt calls natality, right? Natality. But what kind of energy is this? And it's certainly not, you cannot reduce it to physical energy of any sort. So that was how I got into this, okay? Now, why do we need a concept of social energy? What I think I already hinted at, why I think that we need to understand what makes society, social life, human life move, change and operate. We need a conception of what is the operational energy. I think in the social sciences and in social philosophy, we have good analysis of the substance of what there is. For example, we have models of class society, of social inequality, which is really frightening, right? Of social institutions. But that, I would say, is the substance side. But what is driving it? What is operating it? What is moving us, the human beings, you could say, right? This is why I think, as in social philosophy, in sociology, in the social sciences, we need a kind of dual account of our world. We need a conception of the institutional structures, a structural account of what there is, of the substance, right, of society. But we also need an account of the energetic side, you could say. I call it the cultural energies of what is driving human beings. You know, when I say in a minute, I will go back to it. When I claim that a modern society is a society which needs, well, here it comes. Well, so far I said we need a perspectival dualism. We need not just an analysis of what there is, we need also an account, an analysis of the driving factors. And with this, I mean cultural motivational energies. Because when we look to the structural side, this is what I just tried to say already. I define modern society, and with modern, I really think it's become a global model now. No matter this definition, the structural definition of modernity, is true for China and for India, for Japan and for the United States and for Europe and for Africa, at least for many parts in the African world. Maybe not for everything. Also, there are always pockets which somehow seem to resist, and maybe this is where the solution and the salvation comes from. But we have kind of created a global economic system and a social logic which follows this definition. A society can be called modern when its mode of stabilization is dynamic, and that means that it systematically requires material growth, technological acceleration, and cultural innovation in order to reproduce its structure and maintain the institutional status quo. And that means we permanently need to increase just to stay where we are, even if you want to stay, right? To maintain the number of jobs, the healthcare systems, the pension schemes, if they are there, if we have them, right? Then we permanently need to come up with growth, acceleration, and innovation. And you know, in China as in India, in Japan as in the United States, in Russia as in Europe, and in Africa, and of course there is not just Africa, but African states like all the others too. They permanently talk about getting the growth engines going, right? And basically that means we need growth. Right? In some parts of the world, we need growth to overcome poverty. Right? You heard about the basic needs. In some parts of the world, we need growth to feed, to overcome hunger, and to clothe people, and to have housing, and so on. Right? But in the rich countries, actually, we don't need more cars and more planes and more computers and more food and more and all the other stuff, right? But we need to produce and distribute it in order to keep what we have. But no matter what state we are in, a modern society can only stabilize itself, reproduce its structure, if it permanently achieves growth, acceleration, and innovation. Right. By the way, Karl Marx, it's very interesting. Karl Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto said a capitalist modern society, right, needs to kind of permanently destroy itself and rebuild it, right? New means of production, new clothes, new hardware, new software, and new programs in order to maintain itself, right? So it's a kind of, there's high energy all the time, and this energy is not coming from capital, it's not coming from institutions, it's us, the subjects, who have to innovate, to accelerate, and to grow incessantly, year by year. When you look at it from a global perspective, the aliens are watching us. What would they see? I mean, literally, what would they see? They would see a world which is already producing too much in terms of fuel and carbon emissions, and it's producing too much for the human beings. They're kind of burnt out. And if I was an alien, I would say, oh, pure humanity, next year you have to produce more, to consume more, to distribute more, just to stay where you are, right? Otherwise, it's getting even worse. So what I want to say here, right, we have I already said it, I want to point out that we have a kind of dual energy crisis, right? On the one hand, we have a material energy crisis, which you know very well, what leads to the ecological problems, right? The ecological problems in the extractive industries. We need to dig deeper and deeper into Earth to tear out everything it has in store to keep our engines going. It's not just oil and gas and fracking and the other things. It's all the material resources we need to power our computers and smartphones and so on. So we have a kind of extractive energy problem. We need more energy, more resources, and we have an emissive energy problem, as you know, because we're heating up the climate. I don't need to go into this, right? So we have an extractive and an emissive energy crisis. This leads to the ecological disaster. And I think for me it's important to see that this seems a very unnatural way for a form of life. You know, I always tell my students, we have a lot of students and young people here, which is great, to use this alien perspective, because if we could explain it to the aliens or to the children with Edwige Giroutet, right, do philosophy with the children, then you really get interesting things to see. So from an alien perspective, you could say that life on Earth, or biological life, normally tries to save energy, right? Because it's always, living beings, living organisms have an energy problem, so to speak. For example, think of a cat, right? It needs to eat. This is giving it energy in the form of calories. So it needs to invest energy to get the mouse, right? So it needs to invest a little less energy than it gets from his food from the mouse, right? So this is how life develops on Earth. Even it's true for plants too, right? They need energy to keep the biological processes going. And there's always they have to grow roots, for example, the plants. So there's always the need to invest energy, but this investment must kind of yield more energy, right? So you get more than you invest. And if you find a new tool which saves you energy, that's great, because then you can have the same amount without investing more. But modern society is built in a form that we have to kind of invest more and more physical, political, and psychic energy to simply maintain the status quo. I would really say, and this is one of the things, and you know, neither economists nor physicists nor sociologists can solve it on their own. We need philosophy here, right? How did such a form develop? Is it really wrong? Maybe it's good. In many aspects it's good, but it's very peculiar. A form of life which can only maintain itself by permanently investing more and more energy and capturing more and more energy is very strange. Now there's a second side. I said we need to understand the cultural energies. What is driving the machine? It's not capital. I mean, capital might play a role here, right? But I, as a human person, I don't run around and say, oh, I have to keep the acceleration machine going. I have to secure economic growth. This is not how we operate, right? So what's driving us? And I would say on the one hand, it's fear, the fear of losing out. Right, the fear of being left behind, right? But on the other hand, it's a kind of cultural, it's a conception of the good life, I would say. This is what I've written on a lot. It's the idea that our life gets better if we expand our horizon of what we can make available, attainable, and accessible, right? Basically with the energy we have, right? I want to increase the horizon of what I can see with telescopes, right? With microscopes, for example. And it's not just me, this is how our culture operates, right? It's science, it's technology. It's not just seeing things, it's going there, right? Then and next we build satellites. We want to go to see what Jupiter and the other planets really look like. And in the end we come up with rockets. I want to go there personally and bring it under my control. This is the kind of, it's an aspirational side. This is, in the Resonance book I've written a lot about this and afterward, right? I think it's modernity's dominant conception of the good life, increasing the horizon of availability, attainability, and accessibility. And this, of course, kind of brings an idea of at least I have to capture, I like Ian Morris' conception here, more and more energy to increase my horizon of availability, attainability, and accessibility. But the interesting thing here, and this is what concerns me, and this is why I think UNESCO should be concerned with all their programs, right? And particularly when we think of the young, there is the danger of individual and collective exhaustion, of burnout. I really think, I might be wrong, you know, I think you can always be wrong. For me, philosophy has to be done, I think philosophy always has to be done in 2 steps. I think we need parts of individual thinking. You definitely need that, I need it. But that, you never arrive at the truth there. Then you need to put it into dialogue with, like in a setting like UNESCO is wonderful, right? With all the people from all the world, with very many different eyes and ideas. And philosophy with children is great here because you can try to see with their eyes, with new eyes on the problems. But nevertheless, my idea is, my perception is that we are really close to a state of almost global burnout, right? I find this so, and actually this is not just what I get at when I sit in the Black Forest, right? It's what empirical data shows you. From all over the world, burnout levels are really, really, really threatening. You know, at first I thought it's only a kind of, maybe it's Western Europeans, Germans are getting tired, so that doesn't matter. Other countries, right, are ready to take over, which might be very good, right? But then I realized I get invitations from Japan, from Korea, from China, from Latin America, from in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Canada, everywhere. We have incredible rates of burnout and depression, right? I think I put it down here, particularly with the young. And this is why I think in a setting like this, we need to discuss it ensemble, right, together. There are some accounts, you always get different numbers, right? Some speak of 20%, but I read one report which said, well, maybe even up to 40% in Western countries of the young display severe symptoms of depression or burnout. But it's not much better in other countries, in poorer countries, because there the struggle for daily survival is wearing out people too. Right, and for the middle classes, I would say it's a kind of global phenomenon, and particularly with young people. And burnout, you know, it's really interesting. What is burnout? What is burnout? I mean, this is one of the reasons why I started to think about it. Burnout is the complete lack of energy, but it's clearly not physical energy. The physical energy comes from the calories. It's stored in our body fat, and that's not the problem of our societies, of most societies, right? But somehow, but if you're in a burnout, you lack the energy to even move up the stairs or to get out of bed, for example, right? And so one question I really have is, what exactly is lacking when you are in a burnout? And you know, I like to discuss social problems with young people, also with students normally, or high school students, right? And I really feel, you know, every summer I run a summer camp for highly talented students, and I really think the joy is leaving them, right? I really see desperate faces there, and kind of I discussed it with a group of students of mine recently in Leipzig, right? It seems to me like the lust for life is gone. I really think I've been being young normally. This is how we knew it. This is how we conceive of it. Being young is being filled up with a lust for life. You could call it libido with Freud, if you like, right? You want to explore the world. You want to move into the world, even where it is dangerous or not very rational, very reasonable, right? Kind of getting immersed in life. It's the joy of life which you see in young eyes normally, right? I really think I want to have a program, a kind of empirical program on what does it mean to have beaming eyes, right? You know what it means, right? You see it with children sometimes, but we are losing it, right? Sometimes even with primary school children, right? Even they seem to be depressed. I think it has to do with also with the lack of trust in life, right? And this, I think, is connected to the idea of that it's necessary to control a life. So my claim is we have a dual energy crisis. It's not just the physical energy, carbon-based, nuclear, and so on, the extractive and the emissive, but also the psychic energy. And it's not just individual. I mean, I think you could hear it in the words and the speeches we already heard. We somehow seem to lack, as a human species, also the energy to change the things which are obviously wrong. But we still haven't come up with an idea to change the problem with war. But other problems, like, I mean, you look, I mean, explain it to the aliens. we would say, well, you know, our problem is we emit too much carbon-based fossil energies, right, into the atmosphere. So, and we work too much, so we are suffering from burnout. So they would say, oh, the answer to that problem is very easy. Just stop doing it, right? Just slow down. But we're incapable of kind of doing anything, right? So we're running very fast without being capable of change, of real change. So we're out of political energy too, I claim, right? So that means, what's the problem? So here is the problem. On both ends, we seem to be forced to invest. I think really for me, this is the case, right? We invest energy all the time. We have to invest energy in the system, psychic energy and carbon energy and other energies. And every year we have to invest more, and we seem to get less out of it. Right, for our societies and for ourselves, it's never enough. Right? We kind of, I think individually, I really believe there is a parallel between the individual and the collective. But when you start from the individual side, this is what teachers say, what workers say, even professors say, academics say, politicians say, people working at UNESCO say. I know it actually. They have the feeling, we invest more and more, we try more and more, we try harder and harder. We have more conferences, more programs. And it seems like it's less and less what we get out of it. It doesn't work. It doesn't spark the flame, you could say, right? So even Adorno in the Minima Moralia had this great flame, this great part where he says, why is it that we are, how does he put it, that we are storming, it's like we are storming alien stars under a confused compulsion. I think this is a kind of the situation. I still, as you see, I speak of a we. Of course, you can rightly ask who is the we. But as you see, I try to take the alien's perspective and then kind of enter into a dialogue with this between different parts and experiences in the world. But my question is, what's wrong with it, and what kind of energy are we lacking when we really are in a psychic and a collective burnout? So let's go for this. What is a conception of social energy? And as I already said, the interesting thing for me is that we don't have it in Western cultures. We have no concept of energy. This is really strange. If you say the word energy in English or in German or in French or in Spanish, right, you either are speaking of physics and chemistry, like of the physical thing, or you're totally esoteric. Right? There are enough books on energy, but normally if you buy a book on energy, it's somehow with the stars and the stones and something esoteric, right? But what we are lacking is a kind of concept, and I think we obviously need it, right? What is giving society the power to change things? What is giving us as individuals the sense of being full of energy? Right, I will come back to this in the remaining 7 minutes in a second. But for me, it's very important. I think the last sociologist who really tried to think of energy was Bergson, Élan vital. And then in Western tradition, we shy away from energy because it sounds so vitalistic. And vitalism is very dangerous because, number one, it's kind of irrational and it's irresponsible. Right, so vitalism is a kind of, no one really, or not too many people would really want to pursue it. And this is, I find interesting, and this is why I think this is the right place to talk about it, right? This is why I came here, because I think as soon as you go beyond the European frame, the ethnocentric frame, you could say, you see an abundance of concepts of energy which could have come up with explanatory power. Even in Greek, I already mentioned Aristotle, right? But for the Greeks, of course, they had a concept of energeia, ergon, energeia, dynamis, pneuma, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it in English, right? But we find it in Indian philosophy, for example, with prana, for example, maybe even with kundalini. In Chinese conceptions of energy, like Tao or Qi, a lot of people try to draw on it, but then it very quickly gets esoteric. And what I find very interesting is that people like Achille Mbembe or Suleiman Bashir Dian, they really speak of, I mean, I had interviews, I talked to them personally, but we also read stuff of them, and they say African philosophy starts from a concept of energy running through people, through life, and through societies. And it's not physical energy, fossil energy. And so it's philosophy based on conceptions of energy. So I really hope that we could come together. You know, my friend Benno Verlen from Jena has a UNESCO chair on global understanding and just drafted, which was accepted, the Jena Declaration of Cultural Sustainability and Global Understanding. And I think it means if we want to overcome the dual energy crisis, right, we somehow have to join forces and join philosophical, not just philosophical concept, also our basic regional and local practices and understandings. And thinking of energy could be a good way to go about it. So as I said, I want to overcome the danger of esotericism, and I want to overcome Eurocentrism. I think in the Corona crisis, there was an interesting experience for many people, right? A lot of people said, it seems like I'm out of energy, right? At first, they said, I wanted to be with my friends, and I couldn't because I was in the lockdown. But after some time, I didn't even want to call them, right? After some time, I did not feel any desire to engage in sports or my choir or my orchestra, whatever it was, right? And that I found very interesting, right? It seems, this is really interesting. I mean, what I want to get at is that energy is not just something individuals have, right? It's something that, this is the whole point I want to make, it's like circulating social energy. Here, you'll see it in a second here. Randall Collins speaks about it, right? I mean, he's the sociologist I found most interesting here. What he says is that energy is not something individuals have. Energy is something that is almost created, he says, in interaction. It's interactional energy. So if you sit in a group, I think many of you do, it could be a classroom, for example, or it could be a lesson in class, or it could be a meeting at UNESCO, or in your company, or wherever you are. You know, sometimes it's completely draining, right? You feel it was awful, right? You go, everyone leaves the room, felt I'm totally wasted, right? And sometimes it's the opposite experience. People come out, yes, let's go about it, right? So you see, energy clearly is a kind of, it's created in circulation. And this is what, whenever you do an event like this, you hope that you release this form of kind of circulating social energy, right? Which it's not, I mean, with Randall Collins, he says, in the end, it's distributed differently to people. But I think maybe that's not the most important part. The interesting thing here is that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not that I invest energy now in speaking and you take it or so, right? Because if I give a bad speech, then I feel wasted, but you feel wasted too, right? The interesting thing really with social energy is that everyone seems to have more energy if it goes well, and everyone seems to have less energy if it goes badly. This is really interesting, right? So my claim is, in the end, and you could see this, to say it again, in the Corona crisis, I think this is what we were lacking. And the interesting thing with this kind of energy, I call it social energy for lack of a better term now, is that it's different. I mean, of course, we need this energy like we need food, but hunger is different from the lack of social energy, because if you're hungry, the more hungry you are, the more you crave for food, right? But if you lack social energy, then you don't crave company. After some time, people who are lonely don't want company anymore. They don't want interaction anymore, right? So kind of the lack of energy is increasing it. So I obviously had too much here. So let's go to this. What I want to do is I want to develop a concept of media passivity. And again, here I can draw a lot on non-European sources, right? Where you think of energy not as something I have and I invest and then I get an output, like this input-output model. Because if an event goes well in the classroom, in your company, then you cannot say really it was him or it was her who did something. It's in the in-between, what Hannah Arendt calls natality. If you have an event like this at the UNESCO, what you hope for is it might light a spark, something comes out of it, right? And if it does, you cannot say who was the source or where was the source. It was a kind of circulating thing, right? It was something created. And of course, you can get social movements driven by it. Because what I want to explain is, why do we sometimes have a social movement like Fridays for Future, which seems to have a lot of energy, and then it all of a sudden falls down totally and there's no energy left? And we can even think of whole societies. As I already said, with Claude Lévi-Strauss, I've seen him in a photo outside the wall, outside on a wall here too. He speaks of hot and cold societies, right? Cold societies try to preserve their form of life, while hot societies permanently need to change it and try to change it and want to change it. And my conception of modern society, I told you, is that we are stuck in a very unhealthy form in between. We are hot societies, we need to transform everything, the hardware, the software, the programs, and so on, the rules, the regulations, but we seem incapable of really changing. So the question is, how can we create natality, the in-between? Look, I know I have to finish. If there is a moment of resonance, then you're totally active and passive at the same time, right? You're kind of passively like listening to something or receiving something and very actively responding to it. So it's a kind of high energy state where no one loses anything, right? So it's circulating social energy. And the philosophical question I want to end with is the question, here you see all my points, right? It's not the sum of individual energies, I already said. The question is, should we think of energy like something we have or something we participate in? And this is for me a really philosophical question, right? Because I know this is the interesting question. Even in psychology think, and we say, I have a lot of energy today. Maybe that's wrong, right? Maybe we should think of participating in energies which are already there. This is clearly a non-Western way of thinking, but I think philosophy needs to be a global undertaking. Thank you very much for listening.